Good afternoon, class. This is Dr. Carmen Olivia Canyesal Sanoria. I am an alumni of RTRMF College of Medicine, Batch 4. When I was still a student, I am Carmen Olivia Canyesal. I am married to an alumni also of RTR Medical College of Medicine, first batch. And we are blessed with 3 children. My eldest son is a doctor, a senior resident physician at East Avenue Medical Center Pathology Department. And my second child is my only girl. She is she did not graduate in a paramedical or a medical college, but she is an hotelier and she is now in Dubai. My youngest, most of you, probably some of you know, is an alumni also of RTR College of Medical Technology, but is now presently pursuing another course in Southwestern University, taking up veterinary medicine. So let's go to I am tasked to take up the topic on the generalities of the nervous system. And for those of you who have had paramedical courses in your pre-med days, you're not new to this topic because somehow you have been introduced to this already. The nervous system is divided into 2 divisions. You have the structural division and the functional division. The structural division refers to the anatomy of the nervous system, in which they are divided into your central nervous system and your peripheral nervous system. Your central nervous system has 2 components, the brain and the spinal cord, while your peripheral nervous system are your nerves, the one which comes from the brain itself, which are your cranial nerves, and the nerves that arises from the spinal cord, which are your spinal nerves. With regards to the functional division of the central nerve of the nervous system, this is physiologic. The function of the nervous system. So it could either be somatic or autonomic. Somatic are those nerves or the structure of the nervous system which supplies the skeletal muscles and the skeletal muscles, and they have a peculiar characteristic of being voluntary. While your autonomic nervous system, these are the parts of the nervous system which supplies the smooth and cardiac muscles, the glands. And unlike your somatic nervous system, their function is involuntary. Then a third component of the nervous system is your neuroglia. When I was still a student, I take this as the neuroglia is the skeletal system of the nervous system because of its function to protect and support the nervous tissue. These neuroglia are non-conducting cells, so they do not send impulses. They are present there in the nervous tissue to protect and support the nervous tissue. So as I have said, I have this imagination that this is the skeletal system of the nervous system. So what is the nervous system made of? You have your neurons and they have their particular function. The structure of a neuron is that it has a cell body, a cell fiber, and a myelin sheath. The cell body of a neuron is just like the cell body of the cells found in the other organs of our body, except that it has a peculiar characteristic to have a very big nucleus in comparison to the size of the cell body. And the organelles found within the cell body are just like the organelles found in the other cells in the human body. And these are your, if you remember, the mitochondria, the lysosomes, they are present also in the neurons cell body of the neurons. As I have said, the nucleus in comparison to the size of the cell body is relatively bigger. Then another component of the structure of a neuron is your cell fibers. There are two types of cell fibers. You have the dendrites and the axons. The dendrites, these are the nerve fibers that carries the impulses to the cell body. And this usually in a cell body, there will be several dendrites. And the dendrites are thread-like in size and in structure, and they will serve as a receptor for the impulses that will come from the different parts of the body. And then the axons carries impulses away from the cell body. Usually, although this is not absolute, there is one axon per cell body, but at its terminal end, it will branch out. And this will carry impulses to the muscles, glands, and other neurons from the impulses that will come from the brain or the spinal cord. Then another component of the structure of a neuron is the myelin sheath. When I was still a student, I could imagine the myelin sheath to be a dress because it will cover the axon. So this is a fatty material covering of some axon, because there are some axons without myelin sheath, and these are made by swan cells. For the axons in the peripheral nervous system, they are the myelin sheath comes from the swan cells. But for the axons in the central nervous system, it will be coming from the neuroglia. Now, the function of your myelin sheath is to cover and protect some axon. Now, the function of aside from protecting the axons, the myelin sheath also speed up and conduct the nodes of Ranvier. So that's why those, as I have said, some axons do not have myelin sheath. So you can conclude that the travel of the impulse for this unmyelinated axon will be slower than those which will be covered by an axon, covered by a myelin sheath, whose axon is covered by a myelin sheath. Now, axon repair is aided by the neurolemma. The neurolemma is the outermost covering of the swan cell. White matters contain myelinated tissues, while gray matter contains unmyelinated tissue. Again, this is not absolute because there are some white matter which will have axons which are unmyelinated, or there could be some gray matter which has an axon which is myelinated. And if you will know, if you will remember, the white matter of the brain and the spinal cord is made up of fibers, while the gray matter of the brain and the spinal cord is made up of cell bodies. But this is not absolute also, because there are some white matter in which it will have cell bodies, and there are some gray matter which will have nerve fibers. That is not, this refers only to the general whole. Now, there are three types of neuron. You have your sensory or your afferent neurons, and these are the ones which carry impulses towards the central nervous system, and the motor neurons, which are efferent and carry impulses away from the central nervous system. Now, another type of neuron is your interneuron. These relay information within the CNS, so it doesn't go out of the CNS. So you have here the four types of neurons. You have a unipolar neuron. You see that it has only one axon. The bipolar neuron, which has two axons coming out from the cell body, and the pseudo-unipolar. Actually, it's not really, that's why it is pseudo-unipolar, because it is pseudo or not true that it is unipolar, because you see that you have two axons that will come out from it, and then you have the multipolar. This is our common neurons that you will see in the, when you see this in the microscope in your histology. So you have multipolar because it has dendrites that will be located or coming out from the body, from the cell body, which is plenty of dendrites that will arise from there, but it will have only one axon. Now, the nervous system, the neuron will have nerves, will come from the body, it will have nerves. And these nerves, these are fibers, neuronal fibers that will arise from the spinal nerve found in the peripheral nervous system. Now, these nerves could bundle up in the central nervous system as it goes out from the cell body in the central nervous system. And when they bundle up, they will become now your tracts. Now, your nerves could, just like your neuron, could be sensory or motor or mixed. When it is sensory, it is afferent. It contains only fibers that carry impulses towards the CNS from a receptor, while a motor or efferent nerves contains only fibers that carry impulses away from the CNS to an effector. While a mixed nerve contains both motor and sensory fibers. Let me share with you my acronym so that you will not be, I use this so that I will not be confused which is afferent, which is efferent, which is sensory, which is motor. I have what they call same, the acronym that is same: sensory afferent, SA, motor efferent, ME. I do not know if you can use this, but I just would like to share it with you. So this is the neuronal fibers from the skin, which is your receptor, where you will have your receptors. Impulses will travel through your afferent nerve towards your spinal cord, and it will go to the dorsal column of the spinal cord, wherein it will be met by an central neuron or your interferon, so that it will give its impulses to the efferent neuron, and it will cover to the efferent nerve to go to the effector or the muscles. Now, this is a nerve tract, diba? As I have said earlier, a nerve tract is a bundle of nerves. So you have here, usually the nerve tracts is both an ascending and a descending tracts of the spinal cord. So this one, you can see this. It could either be in either of these. It will enter your spinal nerves to go to the dorsal for an ascending tract to the dorsal column, and it will ascend. Some tracts would decoshate and some will not decoshate or cross. It will pass to the different areas of the spinal cord, and it will go to this is already the diencephalon before it will be distributed to the different areas of the brain. Then it will also, from there, once the signal has been processed, it will go together again to descend as another tract to the spinal cord to go to the effector or the organs or the muscles. So the nervous system at work. So your signal or how your nervous system will work would be coming from the nerve impulses, so that it will, or an action potential, which is an electric current that spreads along the nerve fiber. So normally, a nervous system is polarized. It is charged, but there is no stimulation, because the ions in the intracellular and the extracellular are equal in charge. But once a stimulus will come to an axon, to a neuron, there will be a local reversal in charge spreading through the membrane, because the sodium and the potassium channel in the membrane will be opened up. So that with the reversal in charge, it will generate an action potential. When an action potential is generated, it will depolarize the membrane. So this membrane will now become charged. But this depolarized membrane will not stay for long to be depolarized. There will be a rapid reversal in charge at about 1,000th of a second, so that with the reversal, the membrane will be repolarized again, and then it will go back to its polarized state. So depolarization and repolarization are brought about by the rapid shift in sodium and chloride, potassium and calcium ion across the cell membrane using your channel. There is a sodium and a potassium channel. Now, this stimulus is any force that can initiate an action potential. In a polarized membrane, the positive ion sodium and negative ion chloride is in the outer side of the membrane, while the positive ion potassium and negative ion calcium is in the inner side of the membrane. With a stimulus acting on a polarized membrane, remember polarized membrane is a charged membrane, but there is no stimulation. Now, there will be a shift in the charge across the membrane to cause the depolarization. In less than 1,000 of a second, there will be a shift in charge in charge or restoration of the membrane charge, causing repolarization, bringing back the polarized situation of the membrane. So this is it. You have here the extracellular membrane, extracellular side of the cell of the neuron. This is the neuronal membrane. This is intracellular. So you have here the sodium and chloride staying here outside of the cell and potassium staying outside. Now, when there's stimulus, these channels will be opened up so that there will be an exchange of the ions from those from the extracellular will go inside and those from the intracellular will go out, bringing depolarization. But that is only a very brief moment because your stimulus will be running along the membrane. So when the stimulus will go away now from the side of the membrane, there will be a reversal of the ions. So there will be repolarization. Now, a synapse, is the junction between neurons where nerve impulses is transmitted from one neuron to another. Synapse means to clasp or join together. So you have a neurotransmitter which carries the impulses across the synapse and stimulates the cells they reach. Now, this neurotransmitter are chemicals, and they could either be epinephrine or acetylcholine. Now, another component of a synapse is a receptor. This receptor will pick up the neurotransmitter in the postsynaptic membrane. While in between the postsynaptic and presynaptic membrane, you have a cleft, the synaptic cleft, wherein this gap is located between the postsynaptic and presynaptic membrane, and here the neurotransmitters are released. So how does it travel? So you have an impulse traveling along an axon, which is your presynaptic cell. This will be the release of neurotransmitted into the synaptic cleft, the gap between the presynaptic and the postsynaptic cell. Now, with the arrival of the neurotransmitter to a receptor, there will now be a generation of an action potential. Now, these neurotransmitters, it doesn't stay forever in the synaptic cleft. It could either be removed by diffusion, by enzyme destruction, or it will return to its presynaptic cleft where it initially started out. Then another action is your reflex arc. These are complete pathway through the nervous system from stimulus to response. Reflex arc is a pathway that is very fast. It has 5 components. You have a receptors which detect the stimulus found usually in dendrites or in special organs. Then it will travel through a sensory neurons or afferent neurons which will bring the impulses to the central nervous system. Now, within the central nervous system, the impulse will be received by your central neurons and it will transmit the impulses to the different parts of the brain or spinal cord. And then the motor neuron will receive that impulse and coming from the CNS and bring it away to the effector. The effector could either be a muscle or a gland outside of the central nervous system that will carry out a response. So it is the effector which will generate the action of the impulse that has traveled to it. So this is an example of a reflex arc. When you touch something hot, you will generate a withdrawal reflex. So the stimulus that is heat will be received by the receptor in the skin and it will follow through an afferent neuron or your sensory neuron, and it will go to the cell body of the afferent neuron and it will empty into the dorsal column of the spinal cord. And then you have your cell body of the interneuron or your central neuron, which will transmit the impulse to the efferent cell body, so that it will now travel to the efferent nerve fiber to go into the muscle, which will signal the muscle to contract so that the finger will be withdrawn from the painful stimulus of heat. Now, from the brain or cerebrum, we go now to your spinal cord. Where is the spinal cord? This is found within, it is contained within the vertebral column. And it extends from the cervical vertebrae to the first cervical vertebrae to the lumbar vertebrae in adults, first or second lumbar vertebrae in adults. Now, the spinal cord has an H-shaped area of gray matter made up of nerve cell body, surrounded by white matter made up of nerve cell fiber, and the center of the gray matter is a channel for your cerebrospinal fluid. Sorry. So you have here the spinal cord. This is a cross-section of the spinal cord in which you will find the H-shaped gray matter, and outside of it is the white matter. So the gray-shaped gray matter is made up of cell body, while the white or outside of the H-shape is the white matter, which is made up of nerve fibers. So you see here, you have your first cervical spinal nerve to the 8th cranial nerve. Then you have your first thoracic to the 12th thoracic, and then you have 5 lumbar spinal nerves, and then you have the sacral, you have also 5 sacral sacral nerves, and you have several, actually the coccygeal um, spinal nerve would vary. Usually one would only remain. Now, what is the function of the spinal cord? One, it links spinal nerves to the brain. Sensory impulses from the peripheral receptor will go to the dorsal horn of the spine, dorsal horn or dorsal column of the spinal cord. And from there, it will form now, there will be several nerves that will group together to form the ascending tracts of the white matter before it will go to the brain. Then the motor impulses from the brain will descend and will be found in the white matter to go to the ventral horn of the spinal cord. So before it will go to the effector or to the muscles for its action. Let's show this already. Then another action is your reflex activities. And again, reflex activities are very fast. It will generate very fast action. It is simple, but it is rapid automatic response using only few neurons. And usually, your reflex activities, the neurons will not go to the impulse will not go to the brain anymore, but will just end up in the spinal cord or even in the cerebellum before an action will be generated. An example of a reflex activity is your stretch reflex, wherein muscle will contract when pulled excessively, or your eye blink reflex, wherein eye closes with sudden or severe light stimuli. Another is withdrawal reflex, the one that I have shown you earlier, in which you have withdraw from heat. There is sudden pulling away from the stimulus due to pain, heat, or cold. Then the spinal reflex is coordinated in the spinal cord and does not ascend to the brain. So you have your spinal nerves. There are 31 pairs, and they are numbered according to the level of the vertebrae where they will arise. It is composed of C1 to C8, T1 to T12, L1 to L5, S1 to S5, or CX is coccygeal. So there are 8 cervical spinal nerve, and there are 12 thoracic spinal nerve, 5 lumbar spinal nerves, and 5 sacral spinal nerve, and 1 coccygeal spinal nerve. I want you to justify. Please answer this question. I want you to justify why there are 8 cervical spinal nerve when there are only 7 cervical vertebrae. Because if you will notice, T1 and T12 or thoracic spinal nerve have 12 thoracic spinal nerve, and there are 12 thoracic vertebrae. For your lumbar, you have, although they are, you have 5 lumbar spinal nerve as well and they have also 5 lumbar vertebrae. As for your sacral, although they are fused, there are 5 fused sacral vertebrae, and from there 5 sacral spinal nerve will arise. And for your coccyx, although there could be several and coccygeal nerves that will come out, that others will just degenerate as one grows older. So this is what I want you to justify with me, and you have to answer this. Why is there 8 cervical spinal nerve when there are only 7 cervical vertebrae? Now, from the spinal nerves will have a root. This will be the attachment to the spinal cord. They have 2 roots, your dorsal and the ventral root. The dorsal root has a mass swelling of gray matter, which is known as your dorsal root ganglion. And this contains cell bodies of sensory neurons. Now, a ganglion, dorsal or a ventral root ganglion, or it can be called also a horn, is a collection of nerve cell body outside the central nervous system, and all fibers from the sensory receptors lead to it. While a ventral root is a combination of motor or efferent fibers supplying muscles and glands. So these are your effectors, your muscles and your glands. Now the cell bodies is located in the ventral gray matter or the ventral horn of the spinal cord. Spinal nerves are made up of dorsal and ventral root, and they are called as your mixed nerves. Now, what are the branches of the spinal nerves? These are plexuses. These plexuses are interlacing branches of the anterior division of the spinal cord branches, and they are the anterior division of the spinal cord to be distributed to the different parts of the body. So you have 3 plexuses in our body. You have the cervical plexus, which is from the anterior rami of the first 4 cervical spinal nerve and arise from C1 to C4 cervical segment of the neck. Then you have the brachial plexus, which is a network of nerves formed by the anterior rami of the lower 4 cervical nerves and the first thoracic nerves. So from your C5 to T1, that will make up your brachial plexus, the anterior division of the lower 4 cervical nerves and the first thoracic nerves. This will extend from the spinal cord through the cervicoaxillary canal in the neck, over the first rib into the armpit. Then you have the third brachial plexus, your lumbosacral plexus. This is formed by the ventral rami of the lumbar and sacral nerves T12 through S4. Lumbar part is formed by roots from T12 to L4 and the sacral component by L4 to S4 roots. I will not elaborate on these plexuses because further in our studies we will take this up in more details. So this is an example of a brachial plexus. So it will come from a root, it will join together to form a trunk, and it will have an anterior and posterior division before it will give out the different nerves that will go to the different muscles. As for your brachial plexus, it will go to the structures or innervate the upper extremities. We go to the autonomic nervous system. This is the motor division of the visceral nervous system. The characteristic of the autonomic nervous system is it is involuntary and it changes the need that need regulatory adjustment in the body and becomes automatic without conscious awareness. So it will control the glands, the smooth muscle, and the cardiac muscle. You cannot you cannot command your heart to stop beating, or nor can you command your lungs to stop deflating and inflating, because they are involuntary. Even if you hold your breath, magpapakamatay ako, so there ako maginhawa. You cannot do that. You will ultimately breathe. Now, the division of the autonomic nervous system is sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. Your sympathetic nervous system arises from your thoracolumbar. Here, the cell bodies of sympathetic motor neurons originate in the thoracic and lumbar region of the spinal cord. Cell body of the sympathetic motor neuron will travel to the nerve fiber that will extend to the ganglia, and then it will be received by a second neuron before it will stimulate the glands and involuntary muscles. And the neurotransmitter here in the adrenergic system is your epinephrine and norepinephrine. Your parasympathetic nervous system, the cell bodies come from the craniosacral. So the cell bodies of parasympathetic neurons originate in the brainstem and lower sacral part of the spinal cord. The brainstem is the lowest portion of the brain, which is in contact with the spinal cord, which we will see later. Now, the pathway here, the cell body of parasympathetic motor neuron will go to the nerve fiber extending to the autonomic ganglia within or near the effector organ. This is your terminal ganglia. Then it will go to the involuntary muscles. Here, the transmitter is cholinergic, so it uses acetylcholine. While your sympathetic, the transmitter is adrenergic and uses epinephrine and norepinephrine. Now, what is the function of the nervous system? For sympathetic, as you will most know, it is a fight or flight response, for a stress response. And for parasympathetics, the response is relaxed. So the body, when you are sleeping, you are using your parasympathetic autonomic nervous system. While if you are threatened by fear or by hold upper, so you would either you will have to think, will I fight or will I run? Now, another function is usually have the opposite effects on each organ. So your heart, for sympathetic response, it will beat faster. But for your parasympathetic, it will just have a normal beating rate. Now we go to the brain, which is the organ of soft nervous tissue contained in the skull of man or any vertebrate and functioning as the coordinating center of sensation and intellectual and nervous activity. This is the central organ of the human nervous system, and it consists of the cerebrum, the brainstem, and the cerebellum. The cerebrum is the uppermost part of the brain and consists of or made up of three paired lobes and one unpaired lobe. You have the first paired lobe is your frontal lobe. This occupies the most anterior part of the brain, which is responsible for higher cognitive function such as memory, emotion, impulse control, problem solving, social interaction, and motor function. Then you have the parietal lobe, which is located posterior to the frontal lobe. This processes sensory information it receives from the outside world, mainly relating relative to touch, taste, and temperature. Then you have the temporal lobe, which is located in the middle cranial fossa. This is anterior to the occipital lobe and posterior to the frontal lobe and inferior to the sylvian fissure or lateral sulcus. This function is centered around the auditory stimuli, memory, and emotion, contain the primary auditory complex, which is the first area responsible for interpreting information in the form of sounds from the ear. Then you have the occipital lobe, which is in the caudal portion of the skull. This is the smallest lobe of the cerebrum, and this is behind the parietal and temporal lobe. This is the visual processing center contained mostly in the anatomic region of the visual cortex. This is associated with visuospatial processing, distance and depth perception, color determination, object and face and recognition, and memory formation. Then you have the brainstem. This is found at the distal and inferior part of the brain, and it has three components which altogether will help to regulate breathing, heart rate, blood pressure, and several other important functions. The components of the brainstem, you have the midbrain, which is the forwardmost portion of the brainstem associated with the function of vision, hearing, motor control, sleep, wakefulness, arousal, alertness, and temperature regulation. Embryologically, the midbrain comes from your mesencephalon. The pons is the largest part of the brainstem, found superior to the medulla oblongata and inferior to the midbrain. The pons is made up of group of nerves that functions a connection between the cerebrum and the cerebellum. Now, you have the third component, which is your medulla oblongata. This is a long stem-like structure of the brainstem, which is anterior and partially inferior to the cerebellum. The medulla oblongata is cone-shaped. It is a neuronal mass responsible for autonomic function, ranging from vomiting to sneezing. Then you have the cerebellum. The cerebellum is the major structure of the hindbrain, which is located near the brainstem. This is responsible for coordinating voluntary movements and also responsible for a number of functions, including motor skills such as balance, coordination, and posture. Um, so you have here an illustration of the cerebrum. These are the four lobes of the cerebrum. These are paired lobes, the frontal lobe and the parietal lobe and the temporal lobe, while your occipital lobe is not paired. So this is the cerebrum. Now, if you will have it in a sagittal section, this is the cortex of the cerebrum, and this covering is the cranium or the skull. Then at the center of the sagittal section of the cerebrum, you will have the basal ganglia, and in the inferior portion, going towards the spinal cord is your brainstem. And posterior to the cerebrum is the cerebellum. And both your cerebrum and spinal cord is covered by your dura mater. Then this is your brainstem. This one is the midbrain, this is the pons, and this is the medulla oblongata. If you will notice, you will see the different yellowish structure here, which are fibrous part. These are your cranial nerves, because most of your cranial nerves will arise from the brainstem. I will not discuss with you on the brainstem specifically, because we will have a particular lecture on that. And this is a just sagittal section again of your cerebrum, which will show the different lobes of the cerebrum and the cerebellum, and also the brainstem. Thank you for listening, and that ends my topic. I hope you remember the questions that I have asked from you to answer, account or justify why there are 8 cervical spinal nerve in comparison that there are only 7 cervical vertebrae. And another question that I want you to answer is, in a short summary, describe the different lobes of the cerebrum and as to its function. How will, if you will say temporal lobe, what is it related to? So I want you to give me a sort of a function for your temporal lobe, for your parietal lobe, for your occipital lobe, and for your frontal lobe. This will be my sort of attendance for your listening to my lecture. So you have to answer this. Thank you.